Why is Carol Danvers such a disliked character within the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Not a lot of people like the MCU Carol Danvers, myself included, and I have a lot of reasons why. If you're going to introduce a character, especially a character that's set in the past, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you need to at least have it make sense. They introduced her towards the end of Phase 3, which was at the climax of the Infinity Saga. Right? We just had Infinity War prior, and she was teased in the post-credits of that movie. In my opinion, they should have introduced Carol Danvers in the next phase of Marvel, and technically the next saga of Marvel, and also have her origin story be at least a little bit more of what it was like in the comics, with her being Ms. Marvel first, and not rushing her to be Captain Marvel. Now, as far as the initial Captain Marvel movie, my problems with the character doesn't really stem from that movie in particular. It's more so started in Endgame, Avengers Endgame. There is, however, going to be bits and pieces that I'm going to mention from the Captain Marvel movie that goes along with why I don't like the character going forward. Because there's bits and pieces that relate to future events that happened and what she did and what she didn't do as a hero. Now, why didn't I like Captain Marvel in Endgame? Well, firstly, she wasn't in the movie that much. She was in the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie. And she wasn't needed in either. In my opinion, like I said, I think she should have been introduced in Phase 4. So, here's my issue with her at the beginning of the movie. So, after she saves Tony and Nebula and then brings them back to Earth, Tony crashes out and passes out. And, she hears the whole discussion that the Avengers have in regards to Thanos. And then she tells them that, I'm going to go kill Thanos. And she says it so boldly. She says it so it's no problem for her. That, to me, brings up a lot of questions. Because there's no way, with her being in space for as long as she was prior to returning to Earth, after this whole blip event happened. She was in space because her movie took place in the 90s, right? 1995, if I'm not mistaken. And when she comes back to Earth, the timeline it's 2018. So she's in space for roughly 25 years, or close to it, 23 to 25 years, as the defender of the cosmos. And considering that she was in space for that long, I have to ask the question, why didn't she stop Thanos in space during those years? Why didn't she stop him prior to Infinity War? I highly doubt that she didn't know who he was, considering that he's, has a reputation of being the mad Titan warlord. We saw in a flashback scene in Infinity War with Gamora that he killed half the life on her planet and then, adopted her. He's well known within the galaxy. And Gamora's planet isn't the only planet that he's done that to. Right? It's not the only planet that he's taken. See it on screen, but he decimated Xandar to get the Power Stone. Where was Captain Marvel then? Because she's in space while this is all going on and while this is happening. Like, she's in space when Asgard blew up from Ragnarok, the whole event. And then she's in space when Xandar was completely decimated, which we didn't see in the movie, of course. It was off screen, but she was in space this entire time. Doing what? Where was she at? They never explained that. When the Asgardian ship was invaded by Thanos and his Black Order, and they sent out that distress signal at the beginning of the movie, where was Captain Marvel for that? The Guardians ended up showing up. Where the fuck was Captain Marvel? Because she's apparently this big savior, at least that's how she comes across as acting, especially when she was talking to Rhodey in the compound. When he was asking, where the hell have you been this whole time? It's like, I've been, other planets, they don't have you guys. They don't have their Avengers, so I gotta be there to save them. What planets have you saved? You didn't save Xandar from Thanos' attack. You didn't save the Asgardians when they were attacked. You didn't save Thor when he was knocked out in space. The Guardians did that. The Guardians of the Galaxy. When Ego the Living Planet had his whole expansion, where was Captain Marvel? When Ronan the Accuser, who she fought in her movie, when he had the Power Stone and he was on Xandar and he was doing his shit in the first Guardians movie, where was Captain Marvel? Where was Captain Marvel Ego had this whole expansion that affected multiple planets, including Earth. Captain Marvel was nowhere to be found during that. When going back to Ronan the Accuser on Xandar, where was Captain Marvel? Where was she? Who was she saving? She claims to save multiple people on multiple planets. Who was she saved? And see, this is the problem when you introduce a character in the past that, they claim that she's the most powerful. Kevin Feige claimed that she's the most powerful character within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He said that himself in an interview. And we saw that demonstrated in her movie when she was fighting Ronan and his forces. When she unlocked her full power and she was fighting Ronan the Accuser, she tore through those Kree ships like a hot knife through butter. So she's as powerful as she is, and as well known as she claims to be in space. How come she wasn't there to stop these threats? I mean, some of them were going to be more challenging than others for sure. Like, Ego would have been especially a huge challenge for her because he's a celestial being, but still, at least she would have been there. And going back to the Asgardians, when Ragnarok was happening, Hela, slaughtered Asgard, and then Surtur the fire demon completely destroyed it. That happened back to back. They had to fight Hela, and then the whole thing was Surtur destroying the entirety of Asgard, and then the invasion of Thanos and his Black Order attacking the ship and killing half the population of Asgard that was left on that ship. I mean, it was a whole chain of events that happened in regards to the Asgardians. Where was she for all of that? All that happened, and no sign of her anywhere. I find it very hard to believe that she wouldn't have at least heard, like, the distress signal, especially at the beginning of Infinity War. She can fly at the speed of light. We saw that at the end of her movie, when she was flying with next to the Skrulls, when they were going off to find the Skrulls at home, which she never did, by the way. Well, she did. Oh, we'll talk about that. I have a lot to say about the Skrulls and how they're useless. I also find it very interesting that she's apparently this well-known figure in space, but nobody mentions her. No one mentioned her name, and in any of the space-related Marvel movies, her name was never brought up. Rewatch the Guardians movies. Rewatch Thor's 2, 3, and 4. Right, the second, third, and fourth Thor movie, which takes place in space to some degree. Rewatch those movies. Her name isn't mentioned at all. Eternals, I don't think she's mentioned in that. Going back to Endgame, towards the end of the movie, when she comes back during the Battle of Earth, when all the Avengers, assemble and they fight off Thanos and his army. She shows up, destroys his main ship, right? And then she and Thanos fight. Now, this is the same, this is the older Thanos from 2014 to, you know the story. She fights Thanos, and she overpowers him. Thor couldn't even do that. The Hulk couldn't do that. Captain Marvel was able to overpower Thanos, just like she said she could at the beginning of the movie. Right, when she was talking to the Avengers all boldly when she said she was going to go kill Thanos at the beginning. Why didn't she do that prior? She had all these years in space. All these years in space to take his ass down. Both were well known. They never fought once. It seemed to me like, even though they're both well known in space, when she was leaving the Avengers compound, it seemed to me that, in a way, it was the first time she even heard of Thanos. At least that's what it came across. And that doesn't make sense. A lot of things surrounding Captain Marvel that doesn't make sense. But this one, how could she not known of his existence? If she was in space this entire time, saving planets and stuff. He was decimating planets, half the life on multiple planets. How could she have not known of his existence? That doesn't make sense. What's annoying about this is that none of this is explained. Like, the writers at Marvel Studios don't bother to give an explanation as to who she saved in space. Why didn't she stop Thanos prior to the events of Infinity War? Why Captain Marvel just stopped after 2 years of supposedly finding the Skrulls a home. Why she just completely stopped helping them out. We're going to talk about that in another video, because I got a lot to say in regards to the Skrulls. Everything about the Skrulls pretty much come back to Carol Danvers, because they were introduced in her movie. So every time the Skrulls come back, it always centers, it's always full circle. It comes right back around to Carol Danvers. So I'm going to talk about the Skrulls in a different video. Probably not this one, because I got a lot to say in regards to a Secret Invasion, and of course the Marvels. So be on the lookout for that. Like this video, Really appreciate it if you did. And you guys take it easy.